Happy Thanksgiving, everybody. Hope you're having a wonderful day. Thank you so much for being with me for this devotion. We are in Deuteronomy chapter 31 today, and this chapter is pretty straightforward, pretty simple, pretty easy to understand. God and Moses make it really clear that the nation of Israel, the people of Israel, had been and would continue to be rebellious people who turned from God and began worshiping idols, and they would pay a heavy price for it. Yesterday in chapter 28, we saw that one of the things they would suffer because of their turning to idols and disobeying God was captivity. And we'll see that later in the prophets. And so from the very foundation of the nation, if you will, they were warned about the blessings of being faithful and the curses of being unfaithful and turning to idols, and yet they turned to idols time and time again. And so, as in recent weeks, we've read the story of King Saul. Well, what happened there makes sense based on the warnings going all the way back to the time of Moses. What happened in the nation of Israel in the centuries after that, as we read in the book of Kings and Chronicles and the prophets, major and minor prophets, should not surprise us. Really sad and tragic, but God had said, this is what you're going to do, and this is what will happen as a result. And so this chapter is just Moses speaking to the people, this final time before he dies, and Joshua assumes leadership and takes them into the promised land. And just some quick devotional thoughts. One of the things that is told to Joshua to encourage him and to encourage the people is in verse 3 when he says, "It is the Lord your God who will cross ahead of you." As they crossed the Jordan River toward Jericho and began conquering the promised land, he said, "It is the Lord, the holy name, Yahweh, God, who will cross ahead of you, and he will destroy these nations before you, and you shall dispossess them." And the same thing is told to us back in Exodus and other places during the Exodus from Egypt and wandering through the wilderness, that it was God who went before them. The truth is, the Exodus, the miracles of the Exodus, their freedom from slavery, defeating the nations who opposed them during their wandering in the wilderness on their way to the promised land, that didn't happen because of Moses, did not happen because of the priests, did not happen because of Joshua. It happened because God went in front of them. And he's saying, Joshua, just as God went in front of us during the Exodus, he's going to go in front of you as you conquer the promised land, so don't be afraid. And yet when you jump ahead, more than 2 centuries, and you get to the time of Saul and they were facing the threat of another nation, they forgot that God was the one who had always gone in front of them and fought for them and would just raise up a leader as needed. They said, no, we want a king to fight these battles and to lead us. And so it was as though they were saying, we want to have a king and have our plans, and God, you bless our plans, rather than simply trusting God to go in front of them, and we simply do what he tells us to do, and he'll raise up the appropriate leaders. They devalue God's place in their journey as a nation, as a people, and they paid a desperate price for it. Continuing in this speech to Joshua and to the people, down in verse 10, "Then Moses commanded them, saying, at the end of every 7 years, at the time of the year of remission of debts, at the Feast of Booths," this would be their version of Thanksgiving, "when all Israel comes to appear before the Lord your God at the place which you will choose, a place of worship, and eventually the temple in Jerusalem centuries later, you shall read this law in front of all Israel in their hearing. Assemble the people, the men and the women and the children, the alien who is in your town, so that they may hear and learn and fear the Lord your God, and be careful to observe all the words of this law. Their children who have not known, who were not there when these events took place, will hear and learn to fear the Lord your God, as long as you live on the land which you are about to cross the Jordan to possess." And so he said, every 7 years when you have this big occasion, people are to stand and listen as you read the law that God had given Moses to write, the Pentateuch in the Old Testament. Just placing value on the public reading and hearing of God's word. And I would say, parents, it's important that your children see you reading God's word. And not just 2 or 3 times as they're growing up, but consistently, regularly reading God's word. This was a public demonstration of reading God's word in front of their children. And you and I should do that with our children and grandchildren so they know the value of this and let them hear it, not just at church, but from your mouth in your house. And then one last thing real quickly is down in verse 20. He says, "For when I bring them into the land flowing with milk and honey, when I bring them into the land flowing with milk and honey, which I swore to their fathers, and they enter, and then they've eaten, and they're satisfied, and they become prosperous, then they will turn to other gods and serve them and spurn me and break my covenant." It's interesting that when they were desperate and in trouble, they turned to God. But when God blessed them and they were doing well, they forgot God and turned to idols. And yet, that's what happens to a lot of people. The very blessings of God become the very thing sometimes we end up loving more than we love God. The gifts and the blessings of God, the things that you're being thankful for today at your Thanksgiving table, sometimes become the things that become our reason or excuse to not give God the time and the service and the resources and the love and the devotion that He is due, because His blessings become our idols. And so it's amazing how, as Moses was dying, he explained what was going to happen for centuries to come among the Jewish people. Up there in verses 16 and 17, the Lord said to Moses, "Behold, you are about to lie down," or God said to Moses, "You're about to lie down with your fathers. Moses, you're about to die. And this people will arise and play the harlot with strange gods of the land, into the midst of which they are going." Where they're going, the nations around them, they're going to become like those nations. Rather than changing the nations are going to change them. "And they will forsake me and break my covenant which I have made with them. And then my anger will be kindled against them in that day. And I will forsake them and hide my face from them. And they will be consumed. And many evils and troubles will come upon them, so that they will say in that day, is it not because our God is not among us that these evils have come upon us?" And so when you jump ahead 200 years, as we did recently, and you read the story of Saul, and then as you continue your journey through the Old Testament and all the kings and that turned their back on God and the people worshiping idols and all the things that befell them, whether it was captivity in Babylon and other disasters, centuries earlier, God, through Moses, said, that's what's going to happen. And the sad thing in this verse is not just the hardships they endured, but that they endured it because God was not among them. Not because God abandoned them, but because they abandoned God. Sometimes people turn their back on God. Casually, it gets to that place. And then things happen, and they say, well, why did God? No, God, it wasn't God. You turned your back on Him. Your sin will find you out. So be thankful for God's love and blessings in your life, but also search your heart and ask an honest question. Are you allowing any of God's blessings to cause you to pay less attention to God than you should? Happy Thanksgiving. I'll see you tomorrow.